Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the last session of the day. How many people's brains are now starting to slowly ooze out their ear? Yeah, mine too. How many people were actually in my session earlier today? Right, how many people would like to see me fix that error from earlier with the power of troubleshooting? Yeah, a couple of people. Oh, good, thanks. He's going to get a prize. My name is Mark Rhodes, and I'm here today to take you through a SharePoint 2013 forensic deep dive. Okay, my contact details are all here. I'll flash them up again at the end in case you want to drop me an email. Okay, on the agenda today, we're going to move through things pretty rapidly because we have quite a bit of ground to cover. So I'm going to take you through, first off, the Health Analyzer inside SharePoint 2013, the developer dashboard. Now, some new functionality has been added there, and it's actually really cool. So I'd really love to, end this session with everyone taking that away and using it at home. And I'm going to take you through some log capabilities that you might not have even known existed with inside SharePoint 2013. And depending on how time goes, there are a few other techniques I'd like to take you through that may or may not impact your ability to troubleshoot your SharePoint farm. Number one, some troubleshooting fundamentals. I don't know if I need to go through this, but I'm going to anyway. And how many people have gone into a computing office and someone says, "Oh, I can't access a website," or "Oh, I can't get to this particular page," and you don't want to ask that one question, which is the computer on? You have to ask those questions when you're troubleshooting. You really need to get right down to the root of a problem, and you have to not be afraid to ask that really difficult question. So never assume the obvious, right? That someone will have checked something or that something obvious won't have happened. Common sense plays a big part as well, right? For instance, in the medical world, they talk about if you hear hoofbeats, don't think zebra, right? Think horse. It's a lot more likely. But you could put it this way, and that's let's imagine two trees have fallen down during a windy night. So what's more likely, that the wind blew them over or that two meteorites struck and knocked down both trees? Probably that the wind blew them over. And that comes down to something called Occam's razor, which is the simplest explanation is often the best. Okay, moving on to Health Analyzer. Oh, sorry, no, I missed one thing, sorry. That's what I wanted to say. Anytime you're doing troubleshooting, there are really 4 steps you need to do. You need to replicate the problem. So if someone comes to you and says, "I've got a problem," you need to say, "How do I replicate it?" You need to then isolate it, right, and reproduce it so that every time you want that problem to occur, it can occur. You have to then analyze it, and using the analysis, resolve the problem. So those should be the 4 steps you're always taking. So I'm going to take you through a lot of tools that will help you to replicate and isolate the problem. Not so much analyze, that's up to the noggin, and same with resolving it. Okay, moving on to the Health Analyzer. The Health Analyzer was introduced in SharePoint 2010 as a way to get quick and easy information about the health of your farm. And it's based off a set of rules, roughly 65 rules in 4 categories, including performance, health, configuration, and security. And the rules are basically just a simple rule like if this, then take this action, right? And these are all based off timer jobs. So as the timer jobs kick off these rules, for instance, a rule that checks to see if the server farm account is being used for other services, or if accounts used by application pools are in the local machine administrators group. Depending on the kind of rule too, you can notice that some of these have a red cross against them indicating that's an error. Some of them have the blue eye on them indicating information only, and some of them have a little yellow triangle indicating a warning. And depending on the state of that rule, you may or may not choose to take action of it. There is some assembly required, and I hate saying best practice. I'm just going to say rules can sometimes go against guidance, and the guidance is generally things on TechEd such as don't have your farm account in your local administrators group, or don't run multiple service instances of the same service identity. And some of these may not suit your environment. Obviously, if you're running a dev or a test environment, you're going to care far less about whether or not you're meeting TechEd guidance as you are in a production environment. Some rules may need a little bit of tweaking. Here's a few examples I've found. So the server farm account should not be used for other services. Well, in my experience, if you're using the user profile synchronization service, that's going to run as a farm account, and therefore it's going to flag this alert. Number 2, drives are at risk of running out of free space. Well, what's interesting about that is there's actually 2 alerts that are very similar to each other. One saying drives have run out of space, and one saying the drives are about to run out of space. So I think it's a bit of a double up here. I'm not worried about it unless I am running out of space, as in some situations the space is a bit optimistic. Right? The way it works is it wants you to have on any drive 2.5 times the amount of memory you've got free. Some of my servers might have 16 gig of RAM. I don't have just under 40 gig of hard disk free on some drives sometime. Right? In this case, that rule's not really going to help me very much. Database has large amounts of unused space. I see this one quite a bit. How many people in this room, when they're creating a SharePoint farm, pre-stage their databases or set up a model database first? Yep, great practice. So if you're doing that, your databases aren't going, well, you're going to pre-grow your databases prior to them being populated, which means less contention on your disks and less latency. So if I've got large amounts of free space in that database, it's likely because I want to have that database being large. And finally, accounts used by application pools or service identities are in the local machine administrators group. Again, this can sometimes come up. So when you're first provisioning a user profile synchronization service, quite often you add your farm account to the local administrators group. You might remove it later, but what happens if this rule goes through and picks that up during the provisioning process? You're going to be left with an alert there. Now, based on whether or not you want to go ahead and remove that, let's say you've got a test environment. You might not want to remove the account from the local administrators group because it's going to be more time you need to go back and add it in later if you need to reprovision the sync service. So in this case, that rule may not be valid for you. Okay, let's move on to having a look at the health analyzer. Okay, so you can see I'm inside central administration here. A lot of people may have noticed that occasionally you're going to get a red bar across the top of central administration saying you've got the health analyzer picking up errors. Because my farm's relatively clean, I don't have that coming up. So that's probably a good thing. Or I may have deleted the thing. I'm going to go over to monitoring, which is where this all lives. And if I click on Review Problems and Solutions, I can see what's flagging in the Health Analyzer. So you can see I've got two alerts here. One is that outbound email has not been configured. Not really the end of the world, but I think we'll go through and take care of it. And finally, the database has large amounts of unused space. So if we click on this, you can see straight away the details of the error that's occurring. Outbound email has not been configured. The severity is 1 for error in the category of configuration, and a default SMTP server has not been configured. So it's even given me the instructions on how to rectify that if I wanted to using STS ADM. But what I'll do very quickly is we'll just jump over here and we'll set it up. So I'm just setting smtp.contoso.local, which is a local SMTP server, and a from and reply to address. Okay, now if we jump back over to the monitoring tab, we can go in here and click on the rule again, and you'll see at the top here, we have a button called Reanalyze Now. So I'm going to kick that off. Now while it's reanalyzing, I'll take you through to the rule settings. So if we click on View there, these are the actual settings that the rule is going to run as. So we can see we've got a title, outbound email has not been configured, the scope, any server. So if we edit this, I can show you what you can actually set all this to. So we can say all servers or any server, right? As this is a farm-wide setting, any server makes sense. If it was a server-wide setting, all servers would make more sense. The schedule is weekly, but we could say hourly, daily, monthly, or on demand if we wanted to. And we have it set to enabled currently. Now, as I'm probably fixed it up, as we'll see in a minute, I don't really need to disable this rule or modify it in any way. It should be okay. If I wanted to, I could also tick repair automatically. Some rules can actually go through and repair problems for you automatically. So I'm going to click cancel. And we'll go back over to monitoring. And hopefully, we should only see, yep, database has large amounts of unused space as the only error in there. So let's have a quick look at this. So you can see the severity is information, the category is availability, and the following databases have large amount of allocated space on the disk but not in use. So you can see I've got quite a few databases in there. Now, as I said, I've modified my model database on my SQL server so that any time the databases are created, they're going to be created larger than they should be, just to make sure that disk is allocated in big chunks, right? Are you going to cover that in your... Yep. Wayne has a session tomorrow. Yep, that's going to be covering off exactly why you should do that, so I'm not going to go into much detail there. But for me, this particular rule is no value, right? As I've pre-grown the databases, I don't want this coming up and cluttering things. So I'm going to click View on the rule settings, click Edit, and I'm just going to untick Enabled, which will disable that rule for me. Now, if I go back to monitoring, I can't, if I hit reanalyze, right, it's still going to check for those conditions, right? So there's no point in me hitting reanalyze. This time I'm going to have to go through and just remove the alert that's come up. So I can do that quite easily, just like removing any other item from a list. And there we go. So my health analyzer is nice and clean for the moment. So what you could really use this for is a central point to just keep an eye on some of the most basic things about your farm and the health they're in. If you don't have SCOM or something else, going through and checking the health of your system, this is probably a good idea. If you wanted to, you could probably even set up RSS on the list so that any new items that come in will automatically be sent to your email client, so you'll know about them fairly quickly. But if you see that red ribbon up the top of Central Administration when you log in, take a minute, click on it, see what's going on. Okay, now we're going to move on to the developer dashboard. What is a developer dashboard? Well, it's an instrumentation framework that was introduced in SharePoint 2010 that provided diagnostic information to developers or administrators. So don't be afraid of this just because it's called the developer dashboard. This is just as valuable to IT pros. This can help you diagnose page components that would be really difficult to otherwise diagnose or isolate. And there's some really cool improvements to this. For instance, now, as opposed to running in SharePoint 2010, it running at the tail of the page, right? So it could affect the load times on each page. Now it's running in a separate window, and it's just wonderful. It's like any other tool you might use, like Fiddler or something like that. How to enable it? Well, first off, there is a dependency in this in SharePoint 2013 on the usage and health data collection service application. So if you don't have that running, you're going to need to provision it. And then, if you want to enable this, you're going to have to turn it on via PowerShell. So this is what the script looks like to turn it on. I'll leave it up there just for a sec. It is a bit of a mouthful, but what you could do is you could set up a custom PowerShell module or something like that if you wanted to, or an alias to enable this and turn it on quickly or turn it off quickly, or just have it in a notepad window somewhere. And there is one thing I should mention too about SharePoint 2013 compared to SharePoint 2010 for the developer dashboard, in that there is no on-demand mode anymore. The on and on-demand behavior is exactly the same, and you'll see why in a second. To turn it off, all you have to do is change that on to an off. Right, nice and easy. There are a few optional extras we can turn on here. So when we're going through, we can set auto launch enabled so that if a critical error comes up or excessive resource use comes up during page loading, the developer dashboard's automatically going to pop up for you so you can see what happened during that page load. That's if it's turned on. There's also trace enabled, which means at the bottom of developer dashboard output, there'll be a link for you to view a verbose page trace, and that's going to be pages and pages of information about exactly what's happening behind the scenes. And finally, you can define a permissions mask to set who can actually see the developer dashboard when it's coming up. By default, that's set to the permissions add and customize pages. So let's move on to a demonstration. I'll show you what it looks like. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is turn it on, and I can do that with this bit of script I showed earlier. And just like that, it should be turned on. Now, if I jump back over here, you can see up in the top right-hand corner, We just have the little settings cog, help icon, nothing else. Now, if we do a refresh of that page now, you notice it's taking quite a while to load. So maybe there's something wrong with the page. But you can see now in the top right-hand corner, we've got this new icon here. Oh, sorry, it's quite laggy going back to Australia. But that icon there is the link to the developer dashboard. So, as I mentioned, this page seems to be taking a while to load. Let's just test that again by doing a refresh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds, roughly. That's a tad excessive, right? So a little bit more than I'd expect. Something is obviously going on there, and if I use a developer dashboard, I might be able to track down what's going on. I do have a little bit of a hint there that I've got the dodgy web part showing, but maybe it's just unrelated. So let's click on the developer dashboard. And first thing you'll notice is that Windows actually popped up, right? So now I can use the developer dashboard to capture the request. So I just jump back here, do a refresh, and wait my, hopefully not quite 8 seconds again. Okay, so let's just head back over to that. Okay, great. Now, obviously, we're not interested. Let me just zoom in because it might be difficult to see. But we're not interested in that first request, obviously, because that's the developer dashboard showing up, right? So we're not going to worry about that. What we are going to worry about is this request to Contoso SP port 80/site/forensic/site pages/home.aspx. And if we click on that, we're going to get some diagnostic information. You can see I've got a start time, which was a few minutes ago, no, a few seconds ago, and the duration is 10,335.31 milliseconds, which is a rather excessive load time, especially when you consider the CPU time on that request was 233 milliseconds. So it looked like it was just spinning its wheels for about 10 seconds. Now, while we're here, we'll show you a few other things. We can see we've got the username, the page checkout level, the name of the server that's generated this request, the client address, and finally down the bottom, the correlation ID. And I'll come back to the correlation ID in a little bit. If we scroll down a bit further, you can see we've also got some more interesting information there, which is number of SQL queries 3, total SQL duration 29 milliseconds, and number of SP requests 1. All the rest is set to 0. So there's obviously something funky going on here for the page load time to be at 10 seconds. So the developer dashboard gives us some tools to look through that. So if we go through the pages up the top, we have server info, scopes, and let's just make this a bit bigger. And if we go down through scopes, maybe we can see what's happening here. There we go. So straight away, this is where the dodginess happens. And look at that. Start time 264 milliseconds, end time 10,013 milliseconds. So obviously, yep, that dodgy web part looks like it's actually causing the problem. While we're here, though, we can have a look through some of the other tabs. So if we click on SQL, we can see all of the SQL queries that were executed upon this page request. Right, very handy if you're doing troubleshooting or diagnostics to know that information. We can see all the SP requests, all the assertions, if there were any service calls, and my particular favorite here, if we click on ULS, and it might take a few seconds to come up, we can see every log event relating to this correlation ID or this page request. Now that's going to be fantastic for tracing errors that occur on a single page. Sorry, what was that?
Oh, we can get rid of the tab now. It's awesome.
Okay, so you can start to understand why I hold the developer dashboard in such high regard, especially this incarnation of it. It's a very, very powerful tool. What we can do quickly is, knowing this is the dodgy web part, or at least suspecting it, if we edit the page, we might be able to turn this dodgy web part off. Sorry? That's not very civilized. Okay. Let's edit that web part. There's a little bit of irony here. The guy who developed this web part for me just joined Microsoft as a PFE last week. So that's Brian Farnhill. Yep. So you can see under ultra advanced settings, if I zoom right in, I've got enable dodgy mode, and I just unticked that. So let's click OK.
Are you making that web part available?
I'm sure there's plenty of developers out there who can help with that. All right, so if we do a quick refresh of this page now, you can see how quickly it loaded, right? And if we jump back into the developer dashboard, sorry, let me just... Now you can see the load times decreased significantly down to 300 milliseconds. So that helped me to identify that problem very, very rapidly. Okay. All right, that's the developer dashboard. So I hope everyone can take that one away and use it for their own troubleshooting. That's probably the most powerful thing I'll show you today, at least in terms of things you can just do very, very quickly. All right, we're going to move on now to the correlation ID, which is probably my second favorite feature of diagnostics in SharePoint 2013 and 2010. What it is a unique identifier that is used to identify log events and requests that happen. So a correlation ID will be assigned to every single error that happens, but it'll also be assigned to every single page request. Anything that happens internally will have a correlation ID attached to it. So if a timer job kicks off, that's going to have its own correlation ID. Now, this becomes powerful because now we can trace log events back to a single source. Right? Let's say a timer job kicks off, that correlation ID, I can pull that up and see exactly what happened there. The same thing for a page request. If I load it up, you saw when the ULS came up, all that's doing is filtering on the correlation ID of the page. And you can see a correlation ID is basically just a big GUID. So chances are if you've got one of these, you're not going to have duplicate GUIDs, hopefully. It's found absolutely everywhere. So it's found in ULS. It's even stamped into SQL transactions. So if you run a profile against SQL while SharePoint's running, you'll see a SP request GUID in there. You'll see it in the developer dashboard, in PowerShell, inside the logging database, and even in the HTTP header of every single request back and forth to your SharePoint server. It's stamped in there. Correlation IDs allow us to find events that happen on any server or services for a single activity across the farm. Where that becomes powerful is what happens if you're troubleshooting something that goes across, say, a web front end and an application server, right? You might be looking at the same correlation ID, meaning you can really trace things back to a single point of origin. And it'll help us to find any event that we might be related to a problem we're experiencing. So let's first off jump in and have a look at it. Okay. Now, you can see I've got a correlation ID quite clearly here. What I'm going to do first, so I'm going to open Fiddler up for you. So Fiddler, if you're not familiar with it, is a debugging tool that will help trace web requests via just firing up a local proxy. All right, so if I refresh this page, you can see all of that information here. Now, if I click on this first 200 request and I drill down to the headers in here, what you'll be able to see is a whole heap of diagnostic information. And, it's plainly available, but not many people seem to know about it. So you can see we've got the IS latency, the request duration, SP request GUID, in this case our correlation ID, and we have some other things in there, such as the powered by ASP.NET and the SharePoint health score that we might come back to later. So if I was absolutely forced to, right, if I had no other way to get it, I could get my correlation ID from this, right? Let's say, for whatever reason, developer dashboard's not working, then that's where correlation IDs really come into their own. So, what we might do is quickly take advantage of, let's call it the serendipity from earlier today, where my apps demo wasn't working. Every time I clicked edit, it just came up with a blank error, as I'll show you. Come on, fail, please fail. Brilliant. Okay, sorry, something went wrong. An unexpected error has occurred. Developer dashboard in this situation is going to be no use whatsoever, right? Because it's fragged at a point the developer dashboard's not even going to load, right? You can't see the icon up here, so the trace hasn't occurred. But what I can do is I can see that a correlation ID is coming through. Now, I've got a tool on here that I'm going to use quickly to look at those the correlation ID and logging. And I'm sure everyone in the room is familiar with it. That's ULS Viewer. Am I getting a lot of nods? Yes? Great. No, if you're not familiar with it, you can get it from tinyurl.com/ULS Viewer. I'll show you exactly what it is. And it's just a tool to very quickly, in real time, analyze logs. So I'm going to open from ULS. And fairly quickly, we should see things coming through. But what I'm going to do is go back over here and try adding the app again. Right, because now the ULS viewer is going, it'll capture this error. Okay, so again, we get the error. If I go down here and just take part of that correlation ID, I can take the whole thing, but for laziness, I'm just going to take part of it. And I head over to this filter button. You can see I can select correlation contains, and I'll just put in the first part of that GUID. And straight away, we've got all the information that was relative to that request I fired off to try and add that app in. So using this, I might be able to find out exactly what was going wrong with my app request. So we might filter this a bit more and say, quick filter, hide entries with verbose, because I don't think verbose is going to be very helpful. Okay, you can see now we've got some more information here. Everything looks fine, Hello, what's this? Nope, there we go. Unexpected error on saying server available when it's trying to, right, there we go. So it's trying to access the service for app mng.svc. Now, I had to think about this earlier and thought about what it could be. And what I think has happened is that prior to the demo, I went through and ran a few PowerShell scripts which cleaned up my app management service and deprovisioned it. I don't think that's run properly, and I think a proxy has been left over. So what I'm going to do is have a quick look in there to see if there's a duplicate service in there. And we can do that very quickly in PowerShell. I think it's probably the proxy, so let's have a look. Okay, can you see that? There's two in there, right? So what I think has happened is that one stayed in there, even though it was meant to be deprovisioned, and during my script, the second one kicked off, and for whatever reason, it hasn't worked properly. So what I have is handy is a nice script to completely nuke the app management service and the proxies. So I'm just going to quickly run that. Let's just have a look. So that was, I think the proxies are gone, which is okay. Yep, the proxies are gone. So I'll just jump back in CA to take care of that last one. If I go into service applications, I should see a app management service without a proxy now. Yep, right at the top there. Delete that. Delete the data associated with it. I think it's doing something. You know what? Let's just have a look in here. Okay, it looks like it's either just been deleted or I typed it wrong, one of the two. Yep, just been deleted. Okay, great. What I'm going to do now is once that page refreshes, I'll go through and recreate the app management service. I'm just going to, I know I'd usually fill out those fields, but we're in a hurry here. Nobody will mind a few GUIDs in the database, right? It's okay, it's in dev. Everything's okay in dev. Oh, whoops, that's because I just closed Fiddler. Let's just do a refresh, it should have kicked off. Okay, so we can see the app management services there. Now, hopefully, that was the cause of the error. And if I just go back and refresh this page, hopefully we can add that app in. Brilliant. So that took care of the error. Come on, that's pretty impressive, right? Yeah.
You probably should have got it right in the first place.
All right, I'm going to close that. We don't need to add the app. That's all fine. So that's a practical demonstration of how you could actually use UL SEO and a correlation ID to trace an error back to the source and take care of it fairly rapidly. Now, I actually, obviously, between sessions, I had a look at that and figured out what it was, but it only took me about 10 minutes to do that, if that. Right, it was a very quick process, and if I hadn't used correlation IDs and logs to do it, I probably would have been filtering through log events for quite a while before I found it. Okay. Now, as you saw, we just did a little bit of log file analysis, which really is the first stop for many people when troubleshooting. I'd suggest that it might be time to step away from that. If you can, opening up a massive log file in Notepad is probably not the best way forward. ULSView is a more target approach, and if you can combine that with the correlation IDs we just showed, you're going to be much, much quicker and more effective in diagnosing problems. Now, while we're here, we might talk quickly about the event and trace log levels. So everyone's seen what these are. Going through them very quickly. We have the definitions on the left. So critical, a serious error that indicates a major failure. Error, a message type indicates an urgent condition. These should definitely be investigated. After this, we get down to potential problems. So warning is a potential problem or an issue that may require attention. Information does not require any action, and then after that we have verbose, which is for very lengthy messages, right, that are going to return. So if you set to verbose, you're going to get a lot of extra noise in your log files. Now, those ones are actually for event view. On the right-hand side, we've got your trace logs, which are unexpected. So any events that caused a solution to stop processing. So any events that occur at unaccepted, exceptions, critical, or assertions are going to show up as unexpected. Underneath that we have monitorable, so all unrecoverable events that limit functionality of a solution will come up in monitorable. After that we've got high, which are events that are unexpected but don't stop the processing of a solution. Medium, which includes all messages except for verbose and verbose X messages. Verbose, which will include almost all actions on the server, and it's probably going to fill up your log files. And then verbose X, which you can only set via PowerShell, and it includes some very, very low-level diagnostic data, right? It's going to fill up 10 minutes of logs with a couple of gig very quickly on most servers. Log file best practices. So first thing, I hate saying best practices, this is more guidance, which I'd say is change your default logging drive, right? Most people leave it on C drive. I'd probably move it to its own drive, especially if you're doing diagnostics on a production server and you set everything to verbose. Restrict your disk space usage so that your log files will roll over when they hit a specific threshold. I usually set mine to about 5 or 10 gig, right, so I can keep a decent amount of log files without impacting performance. And use the verbose setting very sparingly. You can also enable event log flooding protection, which means that you won't get flooded with repeating events in Windows event log, and it'll suppress any duplicate events based on some conditions. Log file tips, do not use verbose unless you actually require it. It means you take more time going through it than you will getting anything of benefit out of it generally. And finally, make sure if you do use verbose, you can actually reset log levels after you've done your work, and I think it's SP, clear-sp log level is the command that does that in PowerShell. Right, so that'll reset everything back to the default levels once you finish playing with them. How to view? Well, Notepad, which is kind of lame. PowerShell, which is less lame but kind of difficult. ULS Viewer is good, and Developer Dashboard is what I'd call good. And again, for ULS Viewer, there's a URL. It'll work to download it. Okay, let's move on to some cool stuff now, the logging database. How many people have seen a database? It'll be WSS_usage analysis or WSS_logging in SharePoint 2013 or SharePoint 2010. How many people use it? Right, very select handful of people. This, if you have more than one server in your farm, or if you want any diagnostic data, or if you're curious about something that's happening in your farm and you don't understand it, this is the best place to go out of everywhere. A lot of people actually turn this off, which disappoints me, but it's understandable. So, in my opinion, this is one of the best features of SharePoint 2010 and onwards. It's an aggregate of all FireWire data. Everything, absolutely everything, is going to end up in this database, and the data is going to be retained for around 30 days. Now, if you have a look at the logging database disk requirements, this is why people tend to turn it off. Right, let's say a few days into using SharePoint 2010 or SharePoint 2013, this has been turned on by default, but they've got, say, around 10 gig of data sitting there, and this thing just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's called logging, which means it's probably just going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger over time. So at that point, they turn it off. But if they left it run for a whole month, you'll see it's getting up towards about 25, 30 gig by the end of the month. Next month, it's going to hit a peak, right? A high watermark. And when it stays there, it'll tend to hover around that, just say plus or minus 10%, unless something really bad happens and there's a lot of logging data that has to be recorded. So I'd highly recommend that if you've got this in your farm, you've got it disabled, turn it on, and you'll see why in a sec. Because it allows for analysis and interpretation of data far and beyond what's available in existing reporting, and you're pretty creative in what you can do with this, especially if you know how to make some nice SQL queries. And this is also the source of Developer Dashboard's trace logs. So let's flick back over to the demo environment. Okay, I'm going to hop off my SharePoint server. And jump over to my database server. So you can see I've got a lot of queries here that I can execute. So the first one is, I'm going to just select top 20, log time, machine name, process name, area, category, event ID, and message from ULS trace log where level equals unexpected, order by log time descending. And in just a few seconds, I'll be able to see the 20 most recent unexpected error that occurred on my system. Now, keep in mind that I'm not viewing the most recent ones, such as that app one that came up. This is a pre-populated database I've taken from a production server, right, that had much more interesting information in it. So you can see I've got the log time, machine name, process name, the area, category, event ID, and a message. And the message contains some interesting information, which is potentially dangerous request pass value was detected from the client at blah, 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 blah. I don't know what that means, but it's good to have that information there. Now, just a word on how this database actually looks. You can see it's called WSS logging on this particular one, but as I said, it's just a copy from another farm. If we expand it out, most people go straight to tables, and you're going to see a lot of tables in here. That's because the data is stored in partitions. Now, I presume that there are around 32 partitions. The reason for that is I'm guessing for each day, it seems that the data fills into each day's partition, the next day it'll fill into the next partition and so on, and then it'll roll off the back. So it'll keep rolling those over. Presumably it's going to be easier to drop a table than it is to filter the information and delete rows from a table much, much quicker. So I think that's why that's that way. You can see we've got lots of interesting things here. App statistics, app usage, bandwidth usage, blocking queries, database I/O. All of this stuff sounds really good. But it's not terribly easy to manage that. So if we go down to views, you can see views have been created that are simply just an aggregate of each of those partitions. So very easily, let's say I wanted to find out what all the request usage was like on my farm. I might go select top 1,000 rows, and you can see exactly that information I showed you before. Exactly the same information that'll be in your trace logs is actually located here, right? So we can get really constructive with what we do with this particular database. So we could say find the top 10 most active users in the farm. There'd be a bunch of reasons why you could actually look this up if you wanted to, but for instance, you could try and find out if someone's accessing a lot of documents inside the farm. In this case, you can see my web app's doing most of the work. This is one of my favorites. I'm going to show you the top 10 slowest pages in the environment. It takes a little bit of time to run, but you can see in this case, we can find the top 10 slowest pages in the environment. So we can see, let me just zoom in for you. No, I can't zoom in, sorry. The server URL and the site URL and the duration, right? Now, that may not be the best way to do it. So what we can do is we can do exactly the same query, but modify it just a bit to get more interesting information. And you can see now we've got the URL of the slowest pages in the farm, along with a minimum, average, and a maximum duration. That's how long it's taken to render them. So if your average was, say, very high, but your maximum was about the same, you'd know that something weird was going on with that page. In this case, this is just giving a fairly clear indication that some pages are just slower to load than others. Okay. We can have a look at this one, which is a query that will, let's just run it, show which machines in the farm are actually doing the requests and break it down into a day by day. So we can see on this day here, this particular machine did this many requests. Now, if we had multiple web front ends in our farm, you'd be seeing those coming up side by side, and then you could get an idea of, say, if a load balancer's feeding one server more than another server, right? If it's getting a better result, therefore it's feeding it out to that one. And it might help you find out if, say, an app server is doing more requests than it should be doing, right? Or you can use the data constructively to find whatever you want. And finally, this is a stored proc that's actually built in. So all it does is show the site. I'm just going to kick it off. The site, the average duration, the max duration, the total hits, and the unique requests for every single site in the farm. And very quickly, you can see we've got a hour-by-hour breakdown of each site, the average duration, the max duration, the number of page hits, and the unique requests that are going there. So this is really powerful diagnostics and reporting to have. I mean, you could hook Excel up to this and generate whatever we want in the form of any report. Right? So this database is just phenomenal in what you can pull out. I've had a few customers where we've had massive performance issues, and when we couldn't trace it, we went back to this and started writing custom queries to do it. And when we got those queries and got the results, put them in a graph, you could see straight away things like every 30 minutes on the dot, there was a peak load time of 90 seconds. Right? And it wasn't until we started analysing the data like that that we started to see the patterns that were causing it, and we found someone had put in a scheduled task that was, I think it was forcing machine.config to be updated, right? Which caused a recompile of pretty much everything, which slowed it down every 30 minutes on the dot for 90 seconds. If we hadn't had this database, it would have been impossible to find that, right? I mean, you might have stumbled across it, or you might have found by accident that on that 30-minute period, but by just taking these figures and graphing them, we saw it straight away. And if anyone wants those queries, by the way, I'm more than happy to provide them afterwards. Okay. Now, at this point, I can take you through a little bit more. Right, it's kind of cool stuff. It talks about the SharePoint health score and throttling, or we can open the floor to questions because it is at this time for questions. So would everyone prefer questions? Hands up for questions. One person. Hands up for throttling. Like a couple more. Hands up for going home. Yeah, a couple of people there too. All right, let's go through the health score quickly. Now, the reason why health score is important is a new feature called request management. And request management is to give SharePoint knowledge and control over incoming requests to the farm. What that means is if you want to know your user agent, your requested URL, source IP, it allows SharePoint to kind of customize that request and feed it to a specific location. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on that because we really don't have time, but you could use request management, which is turned off by default, to do some kind of funky stuff. Like, for instance, you could route to web front ends with better health based on the health score, which I'll show you in a sec, or you could send heavy requests to more powerful web front ends, or if you're troubleshooting, this is where it kind of gets interesting, you could say, for my IP address, forward all the requests to this particular server so that I know it's exactly this server, and for everyone else, forward them off to a different server, right? So you can do whatever you want on that server and not affect the users of the farm. Now, you could do that also based on health score, which is a 0 to 10 rating that indicates the overall health of your actual SharePoint farm. Now, it's highly dependent on performance counters, and that's customizable as well. So if you decide you want a specific metric to monitor performance on your farm, you could do it via the health score. And how it works is we break down a score into a series of buckets, right? And just down the bottom here, you can see an excerpt from an HTTP header, and you can see I've got a health score listed there of 7. Now, the health score buckets work kind of like this. You can see we've got a category, in this case ASP.NET. We've got a counter, which is a request current counter. And you can see I'm getting a score of 1 if I have 24 or less, a score of 2 if I've got 24.1 to 32, and so on all the way up to 10. Right? 10 being bad, 1 being good, effectively, or 0 being good, sorry. But we can use these requests, and this is actually what SharePoint's built-in web application throttling uses to throttle a request to the server, and this is what request management will use when it's distributing requests based on health. So as I said, it's based on health score. Throttling will kick in for specific servers at specific level and depending on what the score value is. Why is this important? Well, it's an easy metric to gauge server health, and it is one of the fundamental measures for request management. In theory, it could also be used for smart load balancing devices, right? If you did a request, found out the health score of the server, you could distribute requests based on the health score if you wanted to. Okay, let's flick over. We've got a few minutes left. Okay, I'm back on my SharePoint server, and I'm just going to open up Fiddler again. Okay, I'm going to go back to my site and just do a quick refresh. Okay, if we go right up to the top here, go into the headers, you can see very clearly I've got a SharePoint health score of 0 currently, right, which means my farm's very healthy. Now, what I'm going to try and do is just show you. Okay, so that's almost exactly what you saw in that screenshot a minute ago. Those are the current settings that are dictating my health score for this web application. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tweak them a bit. I'm going to fiddle with my memory so that my memory is going to generate a different health score result, even though I've got exactly the same amount of memory free. All right, so you can see, if we just go into Task Manager very quickly, over to Performance, I've got, let's say, 1.4 gig of memory free currently, right? So I'm not too worried about memory on this server. And obviously, it is greater than the bucket at 0, right? It's greater than 1,000, which means it's going to be in the 0 bucket. Let's just grab this. And dump that in there. And now if we go back up, and all I've done is constructed a new object called buckets and then used that to set the HTTP throttling monitor. And you can see I've now got a completely different set of results. And in theory, because I've got 1.4 gig free, it's going to be somewhere between 2,000 and 100, right? So these buckets here, which might make it 6, 7, or 8, I would guess. So let's just go back and do a refresh. Okay, and if we go to Fiddler again, I think that's it there. There we go. So you can see the health score is now being cranked up to 7. What does that mean for you? Well, it means that at certain health scores, different features are going to switch on or off. Now, the one I'm really concerned about is that when we get to 10, we're going to stop responding to page requests. Okay, so what we might do is we might crank it up just that little bit further and see what happens. Okay, so you can see now it's pretty ridiculous, right? Even the lowest bucket of 10, sorry, the highest bucket of 10 now has a minimum memory of 3 gig, right? That's a bit unrealistic, okay? So if we go over and do a refresh, straight away the server is busy now, try again later. And if we go to Fiddler and just scroll down to the newest request, you can see down the bottom here, the health score is now at 10, and 10 is where we stop responding to those requests. But if I want to keep ignoring that, keep in mind that I've forced the server to stop responding at that level, right? So there's nothing actually wrong with the server, it's just that my levels that I'm happy with are no longer the same, okay? So I'm demanding a level of performance out of my server that just can't match. Now, if we wanted to get rid of that, what we could do without modifying the buckets is we could just disable throttling. Let's try that again. Oh, sorry, I know exactly what's happened there. And yes, I'll disable it. Now, if we go back over here, do a quick refresh, jump back to Fiddler, go over here. We should still see the health score is 10, but now it's serving up pages because we're not doing any HTTP throttling any longer. What was I going to mention? Oh yeah, it is important to note too that when you get to 10, it's only the GET requests that stop functioning, right? That server is busy. It's only for new requests. If you have existing requests, let's say if saving a document or something like that, those get the priority. Those will still be allowed through at 10, right? It's just no further requests will be allowed after that. Okay, so that marks the end of that demonstration. Okay, so in summary, we've gone through a few interesting features that I really hope you've taken something out of. Health Analyzer, better log file analysis, developer dashboard, and the server health score. Now, all of these combined could really help you, make your troubleshooting more efficient and have a much better depth of knowledge when managing your server and making sure your server is actually healthy and your farm is healthy. So with that, I'd like to open the floor to questions. Yes?
You mentioned before the logging database default retention is 30 days. Is that configurable or is it 30 days?
No, it's 30 days. I think it's actually 32 partitions rolling over. Right, so that would be my guess. I mean, 2 to the 5 sounds pretty good to me. So. It depends on the size of your farm. The more servers, the more requests, the bigger it's going to be. But in most of the farms that I've dealt with in Australia, which tend to be anywhere from 50 to 200 users, it hovers between 15 and 20 gig of data, roughly. Yes? Yes? Sorry, can you repeat that? It's a good question. I don't actually know what the overhead is, but I've not found it to be of any considerable impact. Yes?
Have you had any great tooling to dissect the logging database, or you just create your own queries and SQL Manager?
The question was, have I got any tooling to dissect queries in the logging database? No, I don't. I just create my own queries based on what I actually need at the time. And that's where I think the most power comes from, is just that flexibility. Yes?
I guess just further to the question, the first question, to what level can you customize a logging database? For example, setting the logging level to say verbose or unexpected, or is there any possibility of doing it from SharePoint, or is that just something you have to go through using
I think I could be wrong about this, and I have to double check. But I suspect even if you've got your log levels set quite high, verbose data seems to turn up in the logging database. I could be wrong. I don't know if that's correct. Can any of you guys confirm that?
I'm thinking more along the lines of, say, let's say you can't handle 30 gig database, you can't provision that, then restrict the level of logging to say, don't want verbose, I just want to have unexpected logs in the logging database.
So as Mark was saying, if you configure the US logging level to be low, you won't get the same level of logging usage. You'll get more than you would normally see with US logs specifically. You're not going to get really high velocity.
So you only see like the limited logging database.
It's limited, but it's not totally in relation to what you said.
Yes.
Can we remove the login database to some other server?
Yes, absolutely, you could. You can actually specify that when you'd have to remove it, turn it off, and then create a new service application for the usage analysis service. And at that point, you could actually specify it. Any other questions?
This
Oh.
developer dashboard is only useful if you've got custom code only on the pages.
Is a developer dashboard only useful if you're a coder?
Yeah, I mean, if a page has got a custom code, or is it?
It is only useful for things that are appearing on a page, yes. You can't really use it to do any diagnosis of service applications or anything like that. At least not that I'm aware of.
If it is out of the box page, still it's useful?
You can see SQL latencies, and if you're having trouble with SQL server or whatever, or it's service application.
There you go. I think we've got time for one more, yes?
Correlation ID doesn't necessarily need to relate to one particular server, does it?
No, you can have...
Is there any particular way if an end user turns up and says, oh, my correlation has come up with I've got a correlation ID of blah, 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 and you've got an interesting phone?
Well, in that situation, let's say you've got the logging database turned on, you're logging all these details, and an end user says, 3 days ago I had this particular error message, I sent a screenshot to you. You could look in that error message and you'd probably see the correlation ID, and then you could dig back into the logging database with it, because it's going to be recorded in there, and get all the information about the request and where it failed, right, across every server in your farm, not just one. So,
Also, you can use your merge as the log file PowerShell command and specify the correlation ID. Then we pick up all the events related to that correlation ID over all servers into one file. So you can watch the open it.
well, that's a good one. I didn't know about that. That's cool.
Just the log file.
Merge-sp log file.
Because then to use the ULS viewer, you've got to go on to using
Yeah. You can do it live in the logging database, but you've got to wait a few minutes for things to turn up unless you're forcing the timer jobs that aggregate that data to go every minute or so. Even then, you might have to wait a minute. All right. Come up and see me afterwards, I think. But I think, do people want some free stuff? Yeah? Okay. So I'm just going to ask questions, and the first person to give the answer that's not a speaker can win. So first thing, when I was talking about the health score, how many buckets were there? First one with the hand up, that gentleman there. Thank you. For this bag of goodies, how many partitions were there in the logging database? He put his hand up first. You've got to get the hand up there. So you're giving it away if you yell it out. You've got to put the hand up. I've got to think of something really difficult now.
What's the correlation ID? Which apps support the health score?
Sorry, say it again.
Which applications support the health score?
I have to know this first, you know. Just give me 1 sec to think something up, unless you think of something good. Sorry? I can't hear. I've got bad hearing. Oh, there you go. Oh, I just learned something. All right, well, which apps support health score? Let's see if anyone knows. No, but no, you don't get it for enthusiastic answers, I'm afraid. Okay, what can the developer dashboard, hands up for this, be set to? There's only 2 modes. Ah, he had his hand up first and he said it. Congratulations. Gee, that's not fair, is it? You got a crutch and a big box. All right, well, thank you very much, everyone. And if you want to ask any questions, I'll be here for a little while. Thank you.